Have you ever watched your own mother stand up at a Thanksgiving dinner table in front of 30 people and tell everyone that you forged your grandfather's signature? Not suggest it quietly, not whisper it to one person, but announce it into a room full of relatives and family friends with the same calm voice she uses to ask someone to pass the cranberry sauce? I have. That was my Thanksgiving, November 28th, 2024. And when she finished, every single person at that table turned to look at me like I was a stranger they'd never met. What happened next is why I'm telling this story. Before I get there, let me take you back. Because this didn't start on Thanksgiving. This started 7 years ago. In the summer, my grandfather decided he trusted me more than anyone else in the family. And the reason he did had nothing to do with money, or legal strategy, or anything my mother has tried to claim since. It had to do with a fishing rod. My grandfather, I called him Pop, had a cabin on Lake Harlan in Kentucky, nothing fancy. 3 bedrooms, a dock that listed slightly to the left, a wood-burning stove he'd installed himself in 1987 and was unreasonably proud of. The property was worth somewhere around $340,000 by the time he passed. Not a fortune, but to our family, it might as well have been the crown jewels. Every summer, growing up, I drove the 4 hours from Cincinnati to spend 2 weeks at that cabin with him, just me and Pop. My mother never came. She called it rustic, which was her word for anything that didn't have a hotel bathroom. My older sister Renee had her dance competitions and her travel cheerleading schedule. My younger brother Daniel was allergic to mosquitoes, or claimed to be, so it was me. Every July, for 11 summers in a row, it was me and a 70-year-old man with a beat-up tackle box and opinions about bass fishing that he could sustain for 4 hours without stopping. I learned to love early mornings because of Pop. I learned patience. I learned that silence between 2 people can be comfortable instead of awkward. I learned that the best conversations happen when no one's trying to have one. The summer I was 26, I drove up to find him sitting on the dock with a legal pad and a pen, writing something in his slow, deliberate handwriting. He looked up when he heard my footsteps on the planks. "There she is," he said. "Sit down. I want to talk to you about something." He told me he'd updated his will, that the cabin and the surrounding 2 acres were going to me, that his attorney, a man named Robert Ashby, who'd handled Pop's affairs for 15 years, had all the paperwork. I stared at him. "Pop! What about Mom? What about Renee and Daniel?" He set the legal pad down on his knee and looked out at the water. "Your mother has her life. Renee has her life. Daniel has his life." He paused. "You have this place the same way I have this place. In here." He tapped his chest. "Just once. You're the only one who comes back." I didn't know what to say, so I didn't say anything. Which, after 11 summers, was exactly the right response. He passed away 14 months later. Cardiac event, quiet, in his sleep, which was the way he would have wanted to go. I found out at 6:40 the morning when my mother called and said the words in the tone of someone delivering a grocery list. The reading of the will happened at Robert Ashby's office in Louisville, 3 weeks after the funeral. My mother sat across from me in a gray blazer with her hands folded in her lap. Renee sat beside her, scrolling her phone under the table. Daniel had sent his apologies from Denver, where he'd lived for 2 years and visited approximately never. When Robert read the part about the cabin, my mother's hands stopped moving. She unfolded them. She set them flat on the table. And she looked at me with an expression I didn't have a name for yet, but would come to recognize over the following year. It was the look of someone calculating. She didn't say anything in that office. Not one word. She thanked Robert, hugged me with both arms in a way that felt like a performance, and drove home in silence. 6 days later, she called me. "I've been thinking," she said. I was at my kitchen table eating cereal for dinner because I was 29 and sometimes that's just what happens. I set my spoon down. "Pop obviously loved you," she continued. "No one is questioning that. But sweetheart, a property like that, maintaining it, the taxes, the upkeep, it's a lot for one person. Especially someone without a lot of financial stability." I was a registered nurse working 36 hours a week in a Cincinnati pediatric unit. I was not wealthy, but I was not drowning either. "I'm fine, Mom," Of course you are. I'm just saying, if you were to sell the property and divide the proceeds with the family equally, the way Pop might have intended before he was, she paused delicately, before he got older, and things got complicated. He was sharp until the day he died. Memory changes things, sweetheart. Priorities shift. I don't think he fully understood. He understood exactly what he was doing. He sat on that dock and he told me himself. Silence, then. Well, I hope you'll think about it. We're still a family. I thought about it for exactly as long as it took me to hang up. The year that followed was a slow erosion. I won't pretend it happened all at once, because that's not how these things work. It was gradual. A birthday dinner where the invitation came 2 days after the party. A group text I noticed existed only after someone accidentally added me. A Christmas where Renee's kids got elaborate gifts from my mother and I got a Barnes & Noble gift card for $25, which I actually found in my stocking, unwrapped, with the receipt still attached. Every time I raised it, the response was some variation of the same thing. I was, without anyone saying the words directly, being punished for keeping what was mine. What I didn't know what I wouldn't know until a Tuesday in October, 6 weeks before Thanksgiving, was that my mother had already made a move. My cousin Bev called me on her lunch break. Bev is my father's sister's daughter, which means she has no stake in Pop's estate, no dog in the fight. She's also the most direct person I have ever met in my life, which is why I almost choked on my coffee when she said, "Claire, has anyone talked to you about the cabin?" I set the coffee down. "What do you mean? I heard something at my mom's house last weekend. I wasn't trying to eavesdrop. Your mom was on the phone in the kitchen and the door was open." Bev hesitated, which she almost never does. She said something about a previous document, that Pop had written something earlier, before his last will, that split the property differently. She mentioned an attorney she'd been working with. I sat very still. That's not possible. I know. That's why I'm calling you. After I hung up, I sat in my car in the hospital parking garage for 20 minutes. Then I called Robert Ashby. Robert confirmed what I already knew. The will he'd drawn up and filed was Pop's final and only valid will. There were no prior documents on record. There was nothing that split the property differently. "Has anyone contacted you about this?" I asked. A pause. Someone did reach out about 3 months ago, asking about the filing timeline. I can't share specifics about what was discussed, but I can tell you that Pop's will stands as filed. 3 months ago. My mother had been working on this for 3 months before I heard a single word. I spent the next 2 weeks making phone calls. I talked to Robert again, this time longer. I called a property attorney in Cincinnati named Carol Vance, whom a coworker had recommended, and I laid out everything I knew. Carol listened without interrupting. When I finished, she said, "I want you to do one thing. Go to the cabin. Check the fireproof lockbox Pop kept. Do you know where it was?" I did. Bottom shelf of the hall closet, behind the extra blankets, combination 1942, the year he was born. I drove up on a Saturday in early November. 4 hours each way in November in Kentucky, so the trees were bare and the lake was gray and the dock looked lonelier than I'd ever seen it. I stood on it for a few minutes before I went inside. The lockbox was where it always was. I knelt on the closet floor and turned the dial and opened it, and inside, between his discharge papers from Korea and an envelope labeled, "In case of," in his handwriting, was a folded piece of paper I had never seen before. It was a letter, dated 8 months before he died. Written to me, "Claire, if you're reading this, I'm already gone. And something has probably happened that made you look for this. I know my daughter. I know how she thinks. By the time you need this letter, she will have said something about what I wanted, about what I intended. She'll have a story ready. Here's the truth. I chose you. Not because I love the others less, but because love and trust are different things. You came back. That means something. I've spoken with Robert. Everything is in order. But I also spoke with my brother Frank. He knows everything. He has copies of everything. If you need someone in your corner, call Frank. The fishing rod on the porch is yours too. Don't let anyone tell you otherwise. Love, Pop." I sat on that closet floor for a long time. The cabin smelled like wood smoke, and something I couldn't name that was just him, still, somehow, in the walls. Then I took a photo of the letter and I called my great-uncle Frank. Frank Harlan, yes, the lake was named for his family. A fact he mentioned with absolutely no humility, was 73 years old, a retired civil engineer, and the kind of man who kept paper records of everything because he had never fully trusted computers. He picked up on the second ring, when I explained what I'd found, and what Bev had heard, and what my mother had apparently been doing for 3 months. He was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "I've been waiting for this call. I have everything ready. Robert and I have been in contact." I asked him what he meant by whatever happens next. "Your mother is planning something for Thanksgiving," he said. "I don't know the details, but she's been calling people. Your Aunt Linda, your cousins on that side, some of your parents' old friends. She's building her case in front of an audience." He was right. I knew he was right. Because I knew my mother too. "What do I do?" "You show up. You sit at that table. You let her think she's winning. And if she makes her move," he paused, and I could hear him almost smiling, "you call me. I'll be 20 minutes away." I sat on the porch of Pop's cabin with the fishing rod across my knees for an hour after I hung up. The lake was flat and cold and entirely still. I thought about not going to Thanksgiving. I thought about how easy that would be. A text, a convenient conflict at work, an apology that cost me nothing. But Pop sat on that dock every summer and waited for me. He didn't go looking for easier options. He just showed up. IRSVPD, yes. November 28th. My mother's house in Lexington. 32 people at 2 tables pushed together in the dining room and the overflow at card tables in the living room. Sweet potato casserole, green bean casserole, a turkey that my mother makes the exact same way every year and considers her masterpiece. On any other Thanksgiving, it would have been fine. I arrived at noon and I could feel it immediately. The way certain people looked at me when I walked in. Not unfriendly, but assessing. The way my Aunt Linda didn't quite meet my eyes when she hugged me. The way Renee was too bright, too cheerful, asking about my drive in a voice pitched for performance. I kept my phone in my pocket and I kept Frank's #1 tap away and I helped carry dishes from the kitchen and I did not let myself think too hard about what was coming. Dinner started at 2. 32 people. Football in the background, the radiator clicking. My mother sat at the head of the table in the chair that used to be Pop's. She'd reupholstered it 2 years ago, which she'd mentioned several times. I was on her left. I don't know if that was deliberate. I think it was. We were halfway through the meal when she tapped her wine glass. Everyone quieted the way you do at a family table when someone taps a glass. It's a reflex. You stop and you look. "I just want to take a moment," my mother said, "to talk about something that's been weighing on our family this year." I set my fork down. "As you all know, we lost Pop last year." She looked around the table with an expression of composed grief. And as happens in families, his passing has brought up some difficult questions about what he intended, about what he wanted for the people he loved. My cousin Renee was nodding. My Aunt Linda was watching me. "I've spent this year doing a lot of research," my mother continued, "talking to people who knew Pop well, looking into the documents surrounding his estate. And I have to be honest with our family," she paused, and her eyes moved to me. "There are some serious concerns about the will that was filed." I heard my own heartbeat. The property at Lake Harlan was supposed to be shared. Pop told me that himself, years before he passed. He wanted all 3 of his grandchildren to benefit. She shook her head with something like sorrow. "What was filed doesn't reflect that. And we have reason to believe that the document may not have been prepared under circumstances that were entirely fair." Silence at the table. 32 people finding somewhere to look that wasn't me. "What does that mean?" my cousin Derek asked. My mother folded her hands. "It means there are questions about how the final version of the will came to be, who had access to Pop in his final years, who he was in contact with regularly." She looked at me again, briefly, "and whether he was being guided toward certain decisions." I understood it now completely. She wasn't going to accuse me directly. She was going to imply it, in front of an audience, and let everyone's imagination do the rest. I was the one who visited. I was the one Pop trusted. In her telling, those facts became evidence of something sinister. "Mom," My voice was even. I was proud of that. Pop was of sound mind when he made his will. Robert Ashby has confirmed that. Robert Ashby was provided limited information, she said smoothly. There are earlier documents that tell a different story. Pop signed something years before, when he wasn't being influenced by anyone, that divided the property equally. I've spoken to Robert. There are no earlier documents on file. I have copies, she said. And she reached under her chair and pulled out a manila folder. It went on the table like a verdict. My Aunt Linda leaned forward. The card table crowd in the living room had gone quiet. Even the football game seemed to dim. I had these reviewed, my mother said, opening the folder. Pop's signature is on these pages. This is what he actually wanted before circumstances changed. I looked at the papers from across the table. I could see Pop's name printed at the bottom of the pages in the signature lines. I could see the signature above it. And in my chest, something went cold, and then steady. Because I had seen Pop's signature 11 summers in a row. On birthday cards and fishing licenses and the back of old photographs. And what I was looking at across that table was not it. The letters were the right shape, but the pressure was wrong. Pop bore down hard when he wrote. He always had. These signatures were light, almost floating. Those aren't his, I said. Excuse me? His signature. That's not how he signed his name. She smiled. Sweetheart, I think I know what my father's signature looks like. Then you know that's not it. The table had become very still. 32 people not eating their turkey. I understand you're upset, my mother said. This is hard to hear. But the family deserves to know the truth, and the truth is that the property was never meant to go to just one person. She looked around the table at the aunts and the cousins and the old family friends. I think we can all agree that Pop would have wanted everyone taken care of. Several people were nodding. One of my mother's friends, a woman named Georgia who'd known her for 20 years, said quietly, "It does seem like a lot for one person." I felt it then. The thing I imagine you feel when you're standing in a room where the ground has shifted and everyone around you is acting like the floor was always tilted. The disorientation of being made into a story without your consent. I thought about not going. I thought about what Pop would have done. I excused myself from the table. I walked out to the front porch in November air that hit me like a hand on the face, bracing and cold and clarifying. I pulled out my phone. I called Frank. He answered before the second ring. She did it, I said. I heard it might be today. His voice was calm. Are you all right? I'm standing on her porch. Then go back inside and sit down. I'll be there in 18 minutes. Frank, 18 minutes, sweetheart. Go sit down. Let her keep talking. I went back inside. I sat down. My mother was still speaking. Something about responsibility and family legacy and what Pop would have wanted. She had transitioned from implication into something closer to conclusion. Several of the older relatives were leaning forward. Renee was watching me with an expression I could not fully decode. I ate a bite of turkey. I set my fork down. I watched the clock on the wall above the sideboard. I counted minutes. At 18 minutes exactly, the doorbell rang. My mother paused mid-sentence. No one moved. This was the moment, I realized later, that she understood something had gone wrong, because my mother had planned this. She had chosen Thanksgiving, chosen this audience, chosen her timing, and a doorbell was not part of the plan. Renee got up to answer it, because no one else moved. I heard the door open. I heard Renee say, "Oh, Uncle Frank?" My mother turned toward the hallway. Frank Harlan walked into that dining room the way he'd probably walked into 100 engineering site assessments, unhurried, carrying a folder of his own, reading the room with the calm of someone who's been reading rooms for 73 years. Behind him was a woman I didn't recognize, mid-50s, professional clothes. "Sorry to interrupt," he said to no one in particular. He looked at my mother. "Helen, you've been busy." "Frank." Her voice was very controlled. "This is a private family dinner." "I am family." He looked around the table. "I'm James Harlan's brother. Most of you know me." He pulled out the empty chair at the far end that someone's coat had been occupying. He sat down. The woman beside him stood. "I'll be brief," Frank said, "because there's still pie." A few people almost smiled. My brother made a will. It's been filed with the county. His attorney is Robert Ashby, and it's valid. That's the first thing. He opened his folder. The second thing is these documents my sister-in-law has been circulating. He didn't look at my mother when he said it. James never signed them. He was with me the weekend those are dated. We were at a union retirees meeting in Bowling Green. I have photographs, receipts, and 2 other men who were there who are willing to say so. The silence in that room was different now. The third thing, Frank continued, is that this woman is Catherine Briggs, a certified document examiner who's worked with the Kentucky state court system for 19 years. She's reviewed the signatures on Helen's documents against certified samples of my brother's handwriting. Catherine placed a single sheet of paper on the table. The signatures on the documents presented today are inconsistent with the known authentic handwriting samples. The pen pressure, letter formation, and baseline angle are all outside the range of variation in Mr. Harlan's genuine signature. My professional opinion is that these documents were not signed by James Harlan. My mother stood up. Her chair scraped back loud enough that the card table crowd in the living room went completely silent. "This is an ambush," she said. Her voice was high and tight in a way I had never heard before. "You come into my home on Thanksgiving." "I came into my family's home," Frank said, still calm, "because you were about to let 30 people believe your daughter forged a dead man's will. And I wasn't going to let that happen." She manipulated him. Everyone knows she manipulated him. All those summers, she showed up. His voice, for the first time, had something hard in it. "Which is more than you did, Helen," James told me. "He waited for you. You didn't come." The room was not breathing. My mother looked at the faces around the table, the aunts and the cousins and the old friends who had been nodding along 20 minutes ago. And I watched something shift. Not dramatically. These things rarely happen dramatically in real life. But I saw Georgia, who'd said it seemed like a lot for one person, look down at her plate. I saw Aunt Linda sit back in her chair. I saw Renee, very carefully, not make eye contact with anyone. "The county property records are accurate," Frank said. "The will stands, and Catherine's report has already been forwarded to Robert Ashby." He looked at his folder for a moment, then closed it. James was my brother for 73 years. I knew his handwriting before he knew his own. What Helen put on that table tonight isn't his. He looked at my mother one more time. When he spoke again, his voice had lost the hard edge. What replaced it was something that sounded almost like disappointment. "He loved you, Helen. Even when you didn't show up, he still loved you. He just couldn't trust you with this." He pushed back his chair. My mother sat down, slowly, like something had gone out of her. "I'm going to stop here for a moment, because I think some of you watching this have been in that seat. The seat where everyone turns to look at you because someone you love has decided your loyalty is a threat. If that's you, leave a comment. Tell me how you handled it. I want to know I'm not the only one who sat at that table and had to choose between keeping the peace and telling the truth." The rest of Thanksgiving was not a movie. There was no dramatic confrontation, no door slamming, no final speech. There was pie, which Frank had pie, because he'd said there would be pie and he meant it. There was a lot of quiet. People found reasons to be in other rooms. The football game came back on. My mother did not speak to me for the rest of the evening. She moved around her own kitchen doing dishes with a focused precision that I recognized as her way of maintaining composure when composure was the only thing left. Frank sat with me on the porch afterward. It was 8 degrees colder than when I'd stood there alone, and he gave me his jacket without asking. "Are you okay?" I asked him. "I'm sad," he said. He wasn't performing it. It was just a fact. She's family. But James was family too, and he's not here to speak for himself. Somebody had to. I thought about the letter in the lockbox. If something has happened that made you look for this, Pop had known. He'd known her, and he'd built a contingency, and he'd trusted Frank and Robert to be the structure holding it up. He'd done this years before he died. He'd been protecting me from something he saw coming. "He really knew," I said. Frank nodded. James knew everything. He just chose to be kind about it for as long as he could. I called Robert Ashby on Monday morning. The property title remained in my name. Robert had already been in contact with Catherine Briggs and had the examiner's report. He mentioned, carefully and without pressure, that depending on what my mother chose to do next, there were legal options available, and also options that didn't involve courts at all. I told him I needed time to think about what I wanted. That's still true. I'm still thinking. What I do know is this. 3 weeks after Thanksgiving, I drove up to the cabin on a Saturday with a thermos of coffee and the fishing rod Pop left me. I sat on that listing dock for 2 hours in December, which requires a level of stubbornness I attribute directly to genetics. I didn't catch anything, but I didn't need to. My Aunt Linda called me into She didn't have a lot to say, but she said it clearly. She'd believed things she shouldn't have believed, and she was sorry. I thanked her. I didn't tell her she had nothing to apologize for, because she did. But I also don't think she's a bad person. I think she was given a convincing story and she trusted the wrong source. That's not the same thing as being malicious. Renee hasn't called. I'm not surprised. Renee has always found it easier to stand near our mother than to figure out what she actually thinks. I'm not angry at her for it. I'm just not holding the door open either. My mother sent me a text on December 5th. It said, "I hope you're taking care of yourself." I read it 3 times. I put my phone face down. I'll respond when I know what I want to say. And I'm not there yet. That's the honest version. That's what I have so far. It's not a clean ending. Pop's fishing rod is standing in the corner of the cabin's front room, and I don't know what happens with my mother, and I'm navigating all of it one decision at a time. But the property is mine. Frank has his copy of everything. Robert Ashby has his copy of everything. And on that listing dock in December, with a thermos going cold beside me and the lake completely still, I felt something that took me a minute to identify. It was the same feeling I used to get after a long day at the hospital, when a shift ended and the next one hadn't started yet. That particular kind of quiet that means you made it through the hard part without losing yourself. I'll take it. If you've stayed with me this far, I want to ask you something. Is there someone in your life who showed up for you the way Pop showed up for me? Someone who kept the evidence, wrote the letter, drove 18 minutes on Thanksgiving because you called? Tell me in the comments. Those people deserve to be named. And if you're in the middle of your own version of this, if someone is rewriting your story without your permission, I hope this reminded you that you're allowed to have witnesses too. You're allowed to have a Frank. Thank you for listening. If any part of this resonated, please hit subscribe. I'll be back soon. Take care of yourselves.